Attorney General, pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you too, in a different way.
Yeah, a different way. It's kind of the new normal, but the new temporary normal. I hope it doesn't last for long. I know.
Me too.
I
Me too.
I have to ask you about this because you've been really leading, I think nationally, you are most visible in leading the fight on this because it's really about protecting voter integrity. And I'm not quite sure why people are changing their tune on this because I was looking at this quote from Omar Escobar, who was the Democrat district attorney of Starr County, Texas, and looking into Texas's history of coercion and intimidation as it relates to mail-in voting and absentee ballots, etc. And Escobar has even been saying, the quote was, "The time has come to consider an alternative to mail-in voting. It needs to be replaced with something, quote, that cannot be hijacked," end quote. So what's changed now that suddenly they're all embracing mail-in voting after speaking out so strenuously against it?
So you ask a very interesting question. It just so happens I was in the Texas House when we debated voter ID for several sessions, finally passing it, which requires you to have a photo ID when you vote. One of the arguments that the Democrats consistently made when we were on the floor of the House was, hey, you shouldn't worry about voter ID. There is no fraud at the ballot box. There's fraud in mail-in ballots. This is where you got to focus your efforts. And now that we passed voter ID, now suddenly mail-in ballots seem to be a great idea for the Democrats. It's very, very interesting.
Very interesting indeed. One of the arguments that I have read and have seen and listened to going into this is that the coronavirus or fears of it or the contraction of it is to be classified as a disability, thus justifying the need for mail-in voting. But that seems to be playing fast and loose with at least the state's version and many states' version of how they define disability.
What a lot of people don't understand, I'm being criticized for enforcing the law. The reality is I don't write these laws anymore. I used to. But
what? You mean the Attorney General doesn't legislate? I'm sorry, that's news here.
I know a lot of people would like me to do it, but it's shocking. No, and the law isn't complicated to read. Anybody can read it. And it basically allows mail-in votes for people who are over 65, people who are in prison who are not felons, people that have said they're going to be out of state, or people who have a disability, which is further defined as some type of sickness or illness. And so it's really the legislature trying to help people who can't get to the ballot box, let them vote and let everybody else come in and show their photo ID so that we have this balance between helping people who can't get there and at the same time trying to ensure the integrity of our elections. And let me just respond to the way you opened the show. My office doesn't have a lot of people prosecuting any type of voter fraud. We had one when I got here. We've gotten the legislature to give us a few more attorneys. We are very busy prosecuting with as much resources as the legislature will give us, and 2/3 of our cases are related to mail-in ballots. And if you look at other states, they're barely even trying to prosecute people. So this narrative that there's no voter fraud and there's no voter fraud as it relates to mail-in ballots is largely not true because we see it, and it's not true because we don't have a lot of evidence because we're not prosecuting it nationally.
Yeah, definitely not prosecuting it nationally. There were even reports of this from 2016. I was looking at a great piece that John Funn had written. The idea that this has never existed. I know that I could have easily, just a kind of a point in this. This is why I personally do not trust any kind of mail-in voting anything. When I first moved to Texas, I received my voter registration card, not just from Texas, but also from my home state of Missouri, who did not apparently want to keep the accurate records that I had moved. And they sent me, I could have voted in Missouri and Texas. I didn't cheat, which is why I vote Republican. But at the same time, I thought I can never trust. You're talking about the same government agencies, and no offense, that mess up a lot of things. I just don't trust this. Not a lot of people do.
Well, you shouldn't. I've had the same thing happen in my family. I have one of my children moved out of state, registered in another state, and we still get ballots for him.
Wow.
It's a system that isn't quite working.
So the argument that, because I've read a lot of the attacks that have been leveled against you and the criticisms that have been leveled against you, and I know the Texas Tribune really likes reprinting those for some reason, but they say that you are acting unethically or that you're using unethical practices to go and apparently deprive people who have no problem standing in line at Trader Joe's for kale but cannot be prevailed upon to go and stand in line to vote. You're depriving those good hipsters of their right to vote. How do you respond to that, Attorney General?
I just say, look, my job again is to enforce Texas law as it's written, not as I might think it should be or how I want it to be or how anybody else wants it to be. It's as the legislature passed it. It's not complicated to interpret. And just because people want a different version of that, it's up to the legislature. If they feel like this needs to be changed, then they need to go through the process with elected representatives who debate, have to get it through both houses, has to be signed by the governor. That's our democratic process, not me
Right.
issuing a new idea about what voter ID, or what we're dealing with now, a bunch of judges who have decided, both federal and state, that we've had to appeal, who have decided that they want to rewrite the law because they don't like what it says.
Yeah, I was reading one judge saying that the mail-in, basically that the mail-in voting can continue, or at least in Texas, which the fight over that how the fight over that continues. Two questions. First off, is there really that? How do you weigh the legitimacy of the arguments that, well, people are either going to spread the coronavirus while they're going to vote, or they're worried about catching it? I mean, if the same people are practicing the social distancing, going to Walmart or going to Costco, and they're wearing their masks or whatever makes them feel good, what is the difference between going to vote and then waiting in line and going into a store?
You're asking the wrong person. To me, it seems very similar.
Well,
I
you
do
write
know that
laws, so I thought that maybe you would also,
yeah,
have that
yeah,
too.
there you go. I do know the governor is, he's extended the voting time from 10 days to 20 days. So he's doubled the amount of times, which would allow for more social distancing. I know that they're going to do their best to sanitize these places, just like they do the grocery stores or pharmacies or anywhere else that people are going now. The reality is we don't have a vaccine for this. We don't have a cure. People are going to have to live their lives,
Right.
and they have to live it under the laws that we have, or they can come to the legislature and say, change them. But don't ask a judge, don't have a judge rewrite the laws, which is what they've attempted to do both at the federal level and at the state level. So we're fighting these cases in both federal and state,
Right.
making different arguments. But fundamentally, what they want us to do is have a judge rewrite the law.
Is there concern too? And the other question that, because I thought of this as it related to the businesses reopening, and I know that we were talking about this weeks ago, worries about liability protections for businesses. Is there a similar thought to that with voting that the state is concerned about, or what is your take on that?
No, I am concerned about businesses. That's why a bunch of attorney generals, Republican attorney generals, sent a letter to Congress asking them to protect businesses, and we hope we'll do that when the state legislature meets. But the state has immunity, sovereign immunity,
Right.
so you can't sue them unless they grant permission. So the idea that the state is somehow going to be liable is
For
just
people to
not,
go out. Yeah. For people, at some point,
not
you have
accurate.
to take responsibility for your own behavior. I mean, if you're doing everything right and you're not, getting around people, you're not, you're wearing your mask, or you're doing your social distancing or whatever. I just don't see any legitimacy to this argument. Clarify something for me too, because the way that the Texas election code describes disability, it's a sickness or physical condition that would prevent someone from going to vote on a certain day. Is the opposition, from what I understand, are they trying to establish that the coronavirus falls under this sickness and or physical condition that prevents people from going and voting?
Yes, you've hit it. And their argument is that because you have a fear that you might get this. Now, look, you could have a fear of this or any other disease that's transmitted by being around other people. It would basically end up taking what the legislature done, and the exception would then swallow the rule. There would be no rule, and so that's the problem. We would have no rules. And once we start down this path of letting judges decide what the law is, we don't have a representative government anymore.
No, we don't, and I don't necessarily trust the judges either, particularly because some of them are being so politically active as opposed to just simply, interpreting the law and applying it as written. How does this end up for Texas, Attorney General?
I think we're going to be successful. We typically lose at the first level because we don't pick the venue. The other side does. We were sued by the Democratic Party in Travis County. That got transferred over to the Court of Appeals in Houston. That's now in front of the Texas Supreme Court. We got a stay on there. They put a gag order on me, which I think is unconstitutional. We had a federal case where a federal judge in San Antonio ruled against this in a kind of a crazy opinion, sort of bemoaning the Constitution. And we got a temporary stay at the Fifth Circuit, so that'll continue on. But we got a good ruling. And we argued last week in front of the Texas Supreme Court. We actually did a mandamus of the 5 county clerks, Dallas, Harris, Travis, some of the others, that were threatening to send out these mail-in ballots. We asked for a mandamus directly to the Supreme Court, So now the Texas Supreme Court, it's up to them to make this decision about what does the law mean.
Right. I am amazed, by the way, at the gag order you just mentioned. How
Yes.
you're the Attorney General of Texas, and maybe it's because I only play a lawyer on radio, but I've failed to see the logic in this.
Well, it was one of the craziest things I've ever seen, because basically what they were saying was, I don't have a First Amendment right as an individual to speak on this issue, on anything related to mail-in ballots. And as the legal officer for the state of Texas, I can't actually give advice on the job that I've been entrusted by the voters, by the Constitution. They basically telling me not to do my constitutional role, which give people legal advice. And they banned me from giving any legal advice that was against allowing mail-in ballots. I've never seen an order that overreaching and that unconstitutional as it relates to the First Amendment.
Yeah, that's pretty unbelievable. This is why people need to they need to take such special care and paying attention to who the judges are on the ballots when they go and vote. And these individuals that are elected and then later appointed, this is how they all filter up. I hope people very much pay close attention to that coming up in 2020. Attorney General, we appreciate your time. I know that we'll be talking with you again as this ball rolls through summer, gets in towards fall, and we get closer to the election. But we appreciate your fight out there. Thank you so much.